Good evening. I hope you're well, and welcome to UNISA'S Accelerated Masters and Doctoral Online Support Program. Tonight, the session that we have is on theoretical and conceptual frameworks within your studies. Just some housekeeping initial considerations. The first thing is just to mention that you are probably watching this as an asynchronous or non-live version recording of the session, in part because we've had some unusual electricity issues all around the country. So you should be able to access this anytime that you wish. If there are emerging questions that arise from this presentation, please feel free to contact the program team and share them with us, and we will find a way to record responses or something of that nature. As always with this session, the initial introductory bit will be with me on video, and then I will take that off so we can run through the presentation. This should take about 45 minutes or so, and it represents part 1 and part 2 of the sessions that you were due to have on theoretical and conceptual frameworks and their use within studies. I will now turn off the video before I begin. My name is Professor Tennyson Mkuchini. I happen to be the project leader for this online support program that you're part of, and today we're going to look at theoretical framework and conceptual framework development within studies. And of course, these are very, very challenging concepts for many, but the actual irony is that they're quite straightforward to understand once you've been exposed to them. So I will utilize the next 45 minutes to an hour to walk you through theoretical frameworks first, and then conceptual frameworks, and I will tie the session up by providing an exercise that will help you to identify appropriate theoretical frameworks for your study. And just for purposes of making this much more easier to get, I think we should begin with some foundational definition and clarification of the two, and that is a theoretical framework versus a conceptual framework. And a theoretical framework in a study is basically existing theories that assist the researcher to better understand the field that they are looking at. I know this definition at this point feels somewhat abstract, and as I proceed on with the presentation, it will become clearer and more clearer. The conceptual framework, by contrast, is something that you, the researcher, can develop based on the theories that exist in relation to whatever you're studying. Just to build up on this, so if, say, a person was doing a study and the study covered a number of topic areas, say, for example, the study looked at the issue of violence, and then maybe looked at motivation to change. So the theoretical framing of that study would probably be based on the student identifying a couple of theories that talk about violence, and then a couple of theories that talk about motivation. And those become the theoretical basis upon which the researcher gets to appreciate the area that they're studying. Those published theories that have been published, accepted, peer-reviewed, and so forth. They are what you would call theoretical frameworks. So they are the theories that help to frame the researcher's understanding of whatever topic or field it is that they're studying. The conceptual framework is different, and it differs in a very specific way. So if you think of the fact that if you were studying, once again, I will use this example around violence and around motivation, you are likely to find theories that talk exclusively about violence, and then theories that talk exclusively about motivation. But none of the theories were written with an expectation that they would be joined together in a study that looks at violence and motivation in one. So when you as a researcher look at these theories, they feel like they are relevant, but they are not perfect fits for the thing that you're studying. So you may extract 2 or 3 concepts from one theory here, 2 or 3 concepts from another here, and you will join up those concepts into a new framing of the things that you think matter to your new and peculiar study. That drawing together of those concepts will result in something that's called a a conceptual framework. So it's a framing of the concepts that are relevant to the complex area that you're looking at. So essentially, a conceptual framework is developed by you, the researcher, and would not have existed before you carried out your study. So I hope that kind of gives a nice global overview of the differences. And of course, the theoretical and conceptual frameworks serve a whole lot of purposes apart from directing you as a researcher in how you look at the topic that you're focusing on. They also guide you in terms of the issues and concepts that you'll be interested in when you develop your data collection instruments. And also they give a sense of what your limits of theoretical interest are going forward. So by all accounts, things like your objectives, things like your primary aim of the study, things like the questionnaire that you use or the data collection instrument and the items on that data collection instrument, all of them are born out of theoretical frameworks and conceptual frameworks. So unless you have those, you really will struggle with quite a number of elements inside or throughout the research process. This next slide here pretty much repeats what I have said already, but puts it in a much more succinct language that probably would align much more clearly if you were to reflect this within an academic document. So Grant and Osunlu say that a theoretical framework is the blueprint or guide for a research and is borrowed by the researcher to build his or her own house. And this really is, once again, just saying that you have all these theoretical underpinnings that help you to understand or clarify how you see or view a particular issue that you're interested in. And they serve as the foundation upon which your research and all the other activities that follow on will be constructed. And some have equated it to a map or to a travel plan. And in those terms, you really get a sense now that the theoretical framework tends to be much earlier on in your study development, because it is that which allows you to develop a sense of what the limits of interest in terms of the theoretical limits of interest for your study will be, and so forth. And as I've mentioned, the theoretical framework, by virtue of it being the theoretical grounding upon which your study runs, it will also be the thing that guides you in terms of identifying your objectives, the things that you will be interested in when you collect data, the themes that you will pursue when you are analyzing the data, and so forth. So it really is something that connects every part of the study to itself. Remember, the theoretical framework is about theories that are pre-existing and have already been published. The conceptual framework, on the other hand, is not yet published, but we will speak more about that in future slides. Grant and Osanlu, once again, provide insights into the importance of a theoretical framework. I think so far I have alluded to the fact that it provides structure and guides you as the researcher about the concepts that are relevant and important to the phenomena that you are studying. So in terms specifically, it defines your study in terms of the philosophical positioning of your study. It guides your study in terms of the epistemological bias or basis of your study. And of course, these theories often have leanings. They will subscribe to particular methodological choices and also to particular ways of analysis when you look at specific topics. So really the theoretical framework builds many and guides the researcher through many elements of the research process. This slide here further identifies the fact that the theoretical framework has a very huge input in terms of identifying the research design that will be opted for, and of course the ensuing data analysis plan. And remember, if you think about this outside of, in practical terms, if you are going to look at the phenomena of violence, for example, and then you have theories about it, those theories detail the things that are conceptually important when you understand violence. And if you accept those conceptually important elements, then the expectation is that they will be included when you develop your objectives for your study. And of course, their very nature has the potential to shape the way that you may decide to design your study and its elements. So really, if you look at it and think about it, the theoretical framework is very critical to all elements of the study. And once again, remember that when we do study, there's always this fine balance that you have to maintain. And this balance relates to you identifying a topic initially from personal interest, but recognizing that this anecdotal interest is insufficient unless there's theoretical tenets that support it. So similarly, a theoretical framework allows you to flesh out and to describe the area that you're looking at by using theories that help to explain that area. So it helps to convince others that your study is not based on personal instincts, but rather on established theory that you have acquired through credible literary sources. This slide speaks about the construction of a theoretical framework. Essentially, Some have written about it. Simon and Goes 2011 offer 5 to-dos that one must consider when they are constructing a theoretical framework. While you look at them, as you focus on them now, the important thing that I want to add to this, to kind of take this into the practical realm, is to basically think of your topic. If you have a research topic and your research topic is, when written out, has of course maybe 20 words or so forth, some of those words relate to concepts of interest. So if your topic is maybe to understand and explore, to critically assess the usefulness of online teaching methods, for example, you might actually then say, right, what are the concepts that are embedded in this question of mine? So there was something about online teaching methods, and maybe we had said online teaching methods as a contributor to student success. So you might have theories that relate to online teaching methods, and then there are theories that relate to student success. So that very ability to look at your question and to say there are 3 or 4 concepts that are embedded in my question, and that those concepts serve as important indicators of where you should seek out your theoretical contributions. So if the title makes mention of student success, if it makes mention of online pedagogies, then one would expect that you would go and look through, peruse the internet for student success theories. Then you would also peruse the internet similarly for online pedagogies. And then you read a few of those theories to see which of those theories look like they would be a useful basis for explaining the concept that, or the issue that you're interested in. Of course, it is possible that you will find more than one theory that you think is relevant. And so you may find that one concept has 2 or 3 theoretical possibilities that are worthy of inclusion. Of course, there are certain limits that are placed on you by the nature of your study and the level of study. So generally in a master's piece of work, students will have 1 or 2 theoretical frameworks at most, but in a doctoral study, students will have anything upward of 3, and usually 3 to 5 is a good number. And the reason there's this differentiating between the master's and the doctoral level studies is that, if, as you can imagine, conceptually a master's level study will have fewer concepts that it's interested in by comparison to a more complex PhD. So in essence, the theoretical guides that exist to guide our understanding will come from 2 areas rather than 3 or 4 areas and so forth. Now we've focused on the theoretical framework. Now, this theoretical framework has this comparative that we call the conceptual framework. And once again, as I've said, this conceptual framework is a structure which you, the researcher, develops because you believe it would best explain the natural progression of the area or the phenomena that you're studying. So if I am studying student success on an online environment, then my theoretical contributions will be theories related to student success, theories related to online learning. But I may look at those theories and think that out of them, they only really need Instead of the 10 concepts that are in one theory, we only need 3. And in another theory, we only need 4. And when you join up those 3 and those 4, and you now have a new framing of the concepts that are relevant to your study, you can then say you have conceptually framed your study. Now you have that conceptual framework. And of course, once you have that conceptual framework, as long as it's still a framework in your study and it's never been published or accepted, it remains a conceptual framework. But what has sometimes happened with conceptual frameworks is you may develop a study and have a conceptual framework, and then in the future, that framework gains more sustenance and it gets more established in your field. It gets published, and then someone approaches or decides to utilize it. When they utilize it and it is not them who developed it, it is no longer a conceptual framework. It exists as their theoretical framework. And in terms of the presentation, if you think about this, basically a conceptual framing is that you will have concepts, usually in the form of 1 or 2 words, short phrases, that you have identified as the concepts that you think are important to understanding this combined interest in, say, student success and in online pedagogies. If, say, you choose that, then one would expect that you would have a list of all the concepts that are relevant. And one way of representing this is that people represent it in a graphical format or sometimes in a narrative format. But if you present it in a graphical format, then you should have as good practice. You should have, if you've presented it graphically as good practice, one would expect that you'd have a narration. So conceptual frameworks are generally in the form of diagrams, but underneath that diagram, you would explain how different things and concepts are interwoven and interlinked with each other. Clearly, if we refer back to the theoretical framework, the theoretical framework was just singularly lone-standing theories that have partial relevance to what it is that you're interested in. Conceptual framework, ironically, is different because you would have taken bits from each of the theoretical frameworks and joined them up together to create this new framework that is of peculiar and unique agreement with the specific part of your study. So then that conceptual framework helps you to identify and construct the exact concepts that are believed to be important for that thing that you're studying. It brings together related concepts to explain or to predict a given event. And it all, of course, it gives you the ability to now have a detailed understanding of the research problem. And it also offers you the potential for understanding the likely solutions that may exist in relation to that. Now, it is important that, as I've said or explained earlier, that a conceptual framework allows for, it is important that when we discuss conceptual framework, you as a researcher understand clearly that the conceptual framework and its accuracy has much to do with you as the individual researcher and your ability to select out the concepts that you think matter. If, of course, you identify irrelevant concepts, then the conceptual framework and the framing of it will be inappropriately done. And I think, as I've mentioned already and will mention now, a good conceptual framework is not just a picture that stands alone, it's a diagrammatic representation that has a narrative that can be understood. This next slide draws upon and identifies the differences between theoretical frameworks and conceptual frameworks. And I think outside of what is in front of you, I have explained the difference around the fact that the theoretical framework is based on existing theory and the conceptual framework is based on the researcher's own understanding of how they believe the research problem they are looking at will be explored. And once again, remember, normally a conceptual framework is developed in the context of a study. So you'll find that it is explicitly done with the expectation that it will be utilized within this very study in which it is developed. Because once it's outside that study and it's published elsewhere, then it ceases to be a conceptual framework and becomes a theoretical framework for the next set of study. Now, I thought it would be really helpful, and this is a very quick, session or a quick example for us to test drive this whole idea of developing a framework. So I will pose a potential research field and then speak you through how one would think about developing frameworks or even identifying appropriate theories to look at. Of course, for us to do this, we need to consider a potential research question. So for purposes of an example, the question that you have in front of you is, what are the factors that impact the uptake of substance misuse and relapse prevention counseling services? So basically, in simple forms, you know, there are many people who have problems with substances, alcohol, taking drugs and all sorts of things. Usually, the expectation is that once they've got an acknowledged problem or they themselves see that they've got a problem, you would assume that because we treat this as an illness, they would readily register for services to help them to manage their substance misuse. And for those who have relapsed, they would take up services for relapse prevention. The reality, unfortunately, is that they don't. They don't. So this study is interested in looking at the factors that impact the uptake of substance misuse. So immediately, when you look at the concepts that are here, there's a concept of substance misuse behaviors. Then, of course, there's behavior change. When people take up prevention services, there's an element of behavior change. So there are two areas that are broadly covered here. But so as a reader, when you read this, you would, of course, have your own theories in your head about substance misuse and so forth. And these theories appear as if they are straight from your own imagination, but they are usually guided by pre-existing scholarly knowledge that you have. So in the case of this study, my hunch, personal hunch, would have been that, hey, the decision for someone to take on a treatment services might be to do with their belief, whether they believe that their beliefs about health, their beliefs about how to get better and so forth and so forth. So it is that hunch which drives me to the first potential model that I can look at and say, hey, this theory will help me to frame my understanding of health-seeking behavior. The fact that when people seek out health services, they do so in part because they have belief systems that tell them to, or belief systems that tell them not to. So that was the first area. But of course, someone else would say, hey, in addition to this set of beliefs that guide people in terms of whether they prioritize particular issues or not, there is this whole body of theory that looks at motivation and how people who are motivated to do things will behave differently from those who are not. So in terms of motivation, there's a very key and well-known theory that we know, and this theory is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Many of you would have come across this. It's a basic theory that says when people are the way that people are motivated is guided by certain understanding, and the understanding is that for someone to seek and be motivated to do higher order things like be religiously connected and so forth, there are more basic needs like the ability to have food, the ability to be loved. All those basic needs have been attended to. So basically, the hunch, the collective hunch that I have is that there are two theories here that I could call theoretical framings of that topic. One is the health belief model, and the other is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Both these theories have got concepts in them. So I've chosen, this is the health belief model. It has concepts. There's a concept to do with people's own perception of how susceptible they are to this thing that I'm studying. It talks also about how they perceive the seriousness of this thing that we're saying they must address. It also has fields that looks at whether people feel particularly they feel that the relapse prevention would help them. So all these little diagrams that you see in front of you and things, they are concepts within the health belief model. So that's one theoretical framework that one can utilize for that study that I had. Secondly, now I will jump this slide because I've attended to it. And also this one because I've attended to it. Also that because I've attended to it. Now, as a group, I want you, while you're listening to the session, to click on the internet or whatever and try to find Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you will identify that this hierarchy of needs has concepts. In it, it identifies that things such as physiology, spiritual needs, emotional needs, all of these are things that need to be met for people to be or motivated to act on things. So this Maslow's theory says that motivation comes from us satisfying some basic things. And of course, the health belief model identified some areas that we should consider as being important facilitating factors in terms of whether people decide to act on something or not. So we now have contributions and factors that were highlighted by Maslow. We have factors that are highlighted in the health belief model. You may decide that only 3 of the factors in the health belief model are relevant, and that in Maslow's hierarchy, only 2 of those things are important. So the 5 things that are important now become a necessary contributing concept to your conceptual framework. So you would now have a conceptual framework that is made up of these different concepts that you have extracted from the health belief model and from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That there was the process for us on how we, one, identify relevant theoretical frameworks, two, how we turn those, the concepts that are contained in those frameworks, selectively chosen so we can join them together into a new conceptual framework. Now, there's another area that did not come up, but maybe an additional potential theoretical foray for people to go into is that, remember, the study is about why people don't take on services to do with their alcohol and substance misuse. You may have a hunch that actually there are a lot of social prejudices and stigma that are associated with substance misuse, and that, even though it's not specifically articulated, may be an area worthy of theoretical contribution. So on that basis, you would find some theories that are related to stigma and social prejudices and their impact on behaviors. Then you utilize that theory as an additional theoretical contributor. So in the end, you'll have the health belief model, you have Maslow's model, and then one of these stigma social exclusion models. And from that, you choose little bits to help satisfy you in terms of the conceptual framework that you're developing. Now, I've kept this brief. The topic is such that you can really get to the bottom of this fairly quickly. But what I suggest to you is that you go online and you find as many standalone studies that you see, and then ask yourself, when you look at the title or the focus area, try to extract from that what the concepts that are important theoretical concepts are. And once you've got those concepts, then look for potential models and theories that are related to those issues. And then from the basis of that, you can create a conceptual framework. And you can actually literally just do this with any random contract that you have, any random article that you come across, I'm sorry. And once you have done that, you will see that you will get much more competent at the ability to discern and extract the theoretical contributing influences in each of the research problems that face you. And once you have those, the progression from theoretical framework to conceptual framework is one that has been clarified here. I've added some reading options for you should you wish to pursue this, and I wish you the best of luck in every single way. Thank you very much.